Well, how does it feel to be the smartest, best-looking group of college students in the state of Texas? Now, the smartest, best-looking part was easy. You know, you're in Phi Theta Kappa, which means something. You're leaders. And I look around the room for the best-looking part. That's easy as well, okay? But, you know, even before that, you chose to start your higher education at Texas Community College. And how smart is that? You chose your education not based on the latest BCS college football bowl or the best fraternity or sorority. Now, those things can come later. You chose your education to go to a community college where you'd have a smaller class, where you could be a leader, and where you can save a ton of money. That's why you're so smart. Give yourself a hand. That's there are times where I wish I would have started a community college myself. I went to the University of North Texas, and I wish I could have maybe gone for a year or two and then gone to UNT. Because if I did go to UNT, I would have met my lovely wife who's in the back there, Elizabeth. Say hi to her right. Now, Stacy mentioned I do a radio show every day before I go to my real job at Weatherford College, and I do it from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. And this morning I got on the air and I described to my co-host what I was doing today. I was going to be speaking to about 250 to 300 Honor Society leaders. And what my co-host said to me was, if I was you, I'd be scared crapless. Except he didn't quite say it like that, I declare. But you know what? When I came in here, y'all been so friendly to me that it just takes away any fear. So thank you very much for being so welcoming to me. You know, you are in for something really great this weekend. I was looking at, you know, one other thing I want to mention is you guys chose to be here. And a lot of your friends, what are your friends doing right now? Back at home. They're on the river, is that what you said? Playing Xbox, maybe working a little fast food here, maybe still asleep right now. You guys are bettering your lives this weekend. Okay? You didn't have to be here. And I'm proud of you. I really am, for making that choice. Okay? Now, I was looking over your session materials and I was very impressed. Today, competition and psychology. The differences between competition and ambition. Is it possible to have a win-win situation where there's no loser? Nature versus nurture in competition. And then competition in the arts, artistic integrity. To what extent should artists compete for critical acclaim? And then later, I believe tomorrow, competition in politics and in science and sports and economics and geography and even food. Now, let me divert from the topic a little bit. Have y'all been paying attention to the royal baby? You know about the royal baby? Who's excited about the royal baby? Be honest with me. Okay, some of y'all are being honest. Okay, some of y'all are really excited about the royal baby. Who can tell me the royal baby's name? George Alexander Louis. Okay? Now, can you imagine what little baby George's life is going to be like? People across the world are waiting for his birth. Every move will be watched his entire life because someday he's going to be the King of England. Now, for the rest of us, we live our lives in anonymity. We begin our life, a small group of people knows who we are, and we have to fight to make something of ourselves. We have to compete to make something of ourselves. So how do us normal Joes, or Stacy's, or Brent's, or Molly's, how do we do something great? How do you go from being a college student to having the career of your dreams? Now, if this weekend is about the culture of competition, then what's the first step? What separates the good from the great? Okay, I want to spend the next few minutes, about 15 minutes, and talk about what and it's stretching yourself. Now, I'm not talking about physically stretching those hamstrings before you do a 5K, okay? I'm talking about stretching your expectations, stretching your capabilities, and stretching what you think you can do with your life. Now, let me tell you really quick what happened to me. I could tell you about a life that began in extreme poverty. I don't have a lot of time, but I could tell you about someone who was on the run from the law. I could tell you about running from the police, engaging in illegal activities. Now, none of those things would be true, but I could tell you those things. No, really pretty normal childhood. UNT, I left UNT and began broadcasting. And, you know, when you're a broadcaster, you think, okay, the bachelor's degree is almost too much education for this field. You know? Lots of crazy characters in broadcasting. And so I worked for about 3 or 4 years full-time in radio. And then a position came open at Weatherford College. Weatherford is just west of Fort Worth. How about the great Dr. Molly Harris over there leading Weatherford College? When I came to Weatherford College, she was a student there. And she dressed up in the coyote costume and danced in the basketball games. It was awesome. But anyway, a position opened at Weatherford College in PR, and I had a bachelor's degree, and there were 40 applicants, a lot of master's degree folks, and I did not think I could get it. But I thought it'd be a great opportunity because I loved Weatherford College. I had started to be around it. I'd started meeting people there. I saw it as a great opportunity, and I kind of applied on a whim. Well, I got the job. And Elizabeth might remember it was one of the best days of our lives when I got that phone call and got that job. It was a real stretch for me to apply for that job. I really didn't know much about advertising. I really didn't know much about PR. I knew about people and broadcasting. So it was really a stretch for me to even apply. And then a stretch to actually do the job once I was hired. And then I had the PR job for several years, and the guy that does fundraising at the college left, and our president came to me and said, I want you to take this job raising money, asking people for money. Now, how many of y'all, if you were asked to raise money for a living, ask people for money, would turn around and run the other direction? Okay, yeah. Well, that's exactly what I did, because I turned my president down. Well, about a year later, he came back to me and said, I want you to think about this again. And it was a real stretch for me to go from what I was doing to raising money. But I took the job, and I haven't turned back since. I've learned as I've gone. I've stretched. I was probably over my head. You know what I mean? But I took it. And then one other thing, I thought I'd never go back to get my master's degree. But my boss told me, you need to get your master's. So at night, with 3 kids and a wife and 2 jobs, 1 class at a time, I drove from Weatherford to Denton, which is about an hour away, and got my master's done. It took me 6 years to do it, 1 class at a time, but it was a stretch. It really didn't make any sense to do it. But it was a stretch for me. Okay? Now, enough about me. I want to talk about some people in history that have stretched themselves beyond what they think they could do, or what they thought they could do, into something great. Okay? Who here has seen the movie The King's Speech? All right, so you know what I'm talking about. I believe it won an Oscar for Best Picture a couple of years ago. Fantastic film, you need to see it. I know movies are a big part of what we're doing this weekend, so I highly recommend it. King George VI in Britain. Speaking of, we have little King George, future King George right now, but King George VI. This is Queen Elizabeth's dad, okay? He was the second oldest son to King George in the 1930s. He was never supposed to be king. His older brother was supposed to be king. He grew up with a serious stammer. You know, the stammer is a speech impediment. He could hardly get a word out when he spoke in front of people. When his father died, his brother took the throne, and less than a year later, his brother quit the job. And so he decided that, yes, I'm going to take this job. Now, he was under a lot of pressure to do it, but he could have said no. He stretched himself, and he became King of England. Took the throne as George VI in 1936. Now, you guys are smart. You know what was going on in the world in the late 30s. There's a guy named Adolf Hitler who was taking over Europe. Can you imagine being the King of England in 1936? And eventually he had to make an incredible speech to his country talking about going to war with Germany and Italy and Japan. He struggled through, he stretched himself beyond that speech impediment, that stammering, the fact that he had not been trained since birth to be the King of England, as his brother had. But he stretched himself and did a great job and got his country through World War II. All right, speaking of movies, who here, we're going to go a little bit further back now, who here has seen the movie Erin Brockovich? A lot of you, fantastic. Okay. So Erin, a divorced mom of two trying to make ends meet, no legal training whatsoever. She barely graduated from college, but not in law. She was struggling to make ends meet. She took a job as a file clerk in a lawyer's office. She stumbled upon some medical records that would explode into the largest direct action lawsuit in U.S. history. She pushed and pushed and pushed, and eventually she convinced her bosses to take Pacific Gas and Electric to court because it was alleged that they were poisoning the water in this California town. And you know what that court case brought? $333 million. She got $2 million out of it herself. She stretched herself beyond what she thought she could do. And she fought for a lot of people. How about Moses from the Bible? Speaking of speech impediments, he had a serious speech impediment. The book of Exodus said that he was slow of speech and slow of tongue. And no, he wasn't from Texas. Not that kind of slow of speech. He led the nation of Israel out of slavery. He told God that, hey, I can't do this. I can't speak in front of large groups. But God said, no, you're going to do it. And Moses said, okay. And he led the nation of Israel for 40 years and led them out of slavery. Some estimates say over 600,000 people he led. A guy could stand it, kind of like King George. Okay, one more historical figure. I know you know who J.K. Rowling is. Any fans? Any Harry Potter fans? All right. What an incredible story she is. She wanted to go to Oxford, but they didn't let her in. She eventually graduated from another university, but then 7 years later, she was unemployed. She had been divorced. Her husband had beat her. She called herself the biggest failure I know. She wrote in coffee houses while she had her baby in a stroller because it was the best way for her baby to sleep. She decided, I want to be an author. Even though I don't have a job, I've never written anything in my life as far as a novel goes. She finally finished her first book. 12 different publishing houses rejected that book. One publisher finally did agree to publish it, but advised her to go ahead and get a day job. She probably wouldn't make enough money to make a living. Well, more than 400 million books later, I think she proved them wrong. She had to stretch herself. She was unemployed. She was a beaten housewife. And she stretched herself to become an author. Now, how can you stretch yourself? I'd like for you to think about that for a minute. There are other examples out there. Rosa Parks, Abraham Lincoln. You can go on and on with people that were in one position and decided to take that leap to something else. To jump into that culture of competition. But how do you do it? I have just some real practical things for you to think about here. These are just from Brent, but some things for you to consider as you consider your next step in your career. You're in a great spot right now to be able to try new things, do new things, try your capabilities out. A couple things. Be well-rounded. And you never know when one area of expertise will lead to something else that you never expected. You're in college right now. Take classes on different things. Expand your horizons. This is the only time in your life you're going to be able to do this, unless you go back to school someday. If you stretch yourself, be ready for some discomfort. Do we have any runners in here? When you stretch, it kind of hurts a little bit, you know? If it doesn't hurt a little bit, you're probably not doing it right. When you stretch yourself in a global sense, yeah, you're probably going to have some discomfort. There's going to be some hard times too. Be ready for that. Don't be surprised by that. When you try something different, maybe it doesn't work 100%. Don't be afraid of failure. Be open-minded. Remember your principles. And have a support system. The people around you make such a big difference in your life. As I close, I want to give one example of a student I know at Weatherford College that stretched herself. She graduated from high school but started hanging out with what she called the wrong crowd. I spoke to this student on the phone yesterday and asked her if I could tell her story. She said yes. She was kicked out of her house by a mom that loved her. She lived in her car for a few weeks. She met a guy, and he kind of encouraged the party lifestyle. So the drinking increased, the drug use increased, and one thing led to another, and she found herself selling marijuana. Then in July of 2009, when she refused to sell some marijuana to a group of guys, she was attacked, and she was stabbed in the chest. And she almost died. The doctors pulled her parents aside and said, I don't think she's going to make it. 4 blood transfusions. Thank God she did pull through, but the police were waiting for her in the hospital. And eventually she did spend a little bit of time in jail. Then she got community service and probation, 250 hours of community service. But that was a turning point in her life. She decided that, look, this is not what I want my life to be. My friends are pulling me down. My boyfriend's pulling me down. And she decided to change her life. So she came to Weatherford College. And it took a while. It took a while to get her life back together. She wasn't perfect at first. She enrolled at Weatherford College, and she got involved in campus activities. As a matter of fact, in one club, she joined a club and said, I want to be involved. I don't want to just go to class and go back on speech. She joined this one club, and through some leadership opportunities, she became president of that club. Now to do that, she had to do a speech in front of the club members. And she was scared to death of public speaking. Does that sound familiar? But she did it anyway. She stretched herself beyond what she thought she could do. And she became president of that club. And then she took that club to a whole new level. And her and the leadership of that club took it to an international level. She wanted to see what she was capable of to push herself. She returned to her faith in God. And she turned her life around. And she's here in the room with us today. I'd like to recognize Stacy King. Stacy stretched herself. She took what was a tough situation, a bad situation, part of it is what she created, and she made something of it. How can you stretch yourself today? How can you stretch yourself this weekend? One more quote before I leave. An Indian philosopher said, sound when stretched is music. Movement when stretched is dance. And life when stretched is celebration. Enjoy the celebration. Thank you very much.